Through majestic forests, alpine valleys and crystal-clear lakes, following the trails of wild animals, in search of rare birds, in places where no man had set a foot before. Precious, magnificent nature, in all its diversity and grandeur, in the documentary series Kazakhstan's Wildlife Sanctuaries. Today we will visit one of the most mysterious places of western Kazakhstan, the Ustyurt Plateau. Our expedition is sent to Yeraliv district of Mangistau region, to the Ustyurt Nature Reserve. The rapid development of wild nature territories of Mangistau began in the 80s. The desert landscapes proved to be very vulnerable. The development of oil fields, exploration, and uncontrolled construction of roads caused significant damage to fragile desert ecosystems. Only desert-specific plants grow on Ustyurt Plateau. Among them, there are several kinds of thistle, Eramperum, Anabasis salsa, and Limonium species. But the onrush of off-road vehicles, crawler tractors, and herds of livestock could quickly destroy the thing to begin with layer of fertile soil. In 1984, the part of the western escarpment of the Ustyurt Plateau, including valley in front of the escarpment and Kender-Lisa cavity, were declared a nature reserve areas. The reserve territory has areas of halosylon sandy deserts and salines, also known as source. But of course the main sites of the Ustyurt are its escarpments. Scientists came up with the special term chinky to refer to steep cliffs created as a result of the retreating of the Caspian Sea. The area of the Ustyurt State Reserve is 220,000 hectares. The nature reserve was established in order to maintain reference sites of fragile desert ecosystems. Moderate ecotourism is the only type of economic activity that was allowed here. The creation of the reserve stopped the degradation of desert landscape and helped to stabilize the populations of rare animals. The expedition is sent from Aktau to Zhanaozen district center, where administration of the nature reserve is located. Mangishlag is one of the most arid places in Kazakhstan. The average annual rainfall here is less than 120 millimeters per year. But year 2016 was unusually rainy. Streams of water flood streets of Zhanaozen. Country roads turned into mud seas. Along the way, the expedition visits the famous Valley of the Spheres. This tourist site is widely known outside of Kazakhstan. One moment, the car is driving through a halosylon desert, and suddenly the road abuts into steep hill. On top of the ridge, an unknown hand placed stone spheres, just like chess figures. Paleogeologists believe that the spherical formations of the Taurish area appeared on the bottom of the Tethys Ocean about 100 million years ago. Small pieces of metal compounds deposited in the sea mud were evenly overgrown with salts on all sides, and after millions of years gained almost perfectly spherical shape. From Zhanaozen, the expedition is directed towards the world-famous mountain Bozzhira. Endless oil fields stretch along the regional roadsides. Biggest part of the population in this region is employed in oil and gas sector. Cars are stalling in soggy clay, but the amount of mud decreases as they climb up the ledges of Kulandy. The highest spot of the reserve, 340 meters above sea level, is located on the western escarpment of Ustyurt in Kugusem well area. The lowest, 52 meters, in the northern part of Kendor Liso. Mountain tops are marked with heaps of stones, or bore. They acted as some sort of border pillars between different camping grounds, or as travelers' signposts. Another version mentions that it might have had a sacred meaning for ancient inhabitants of Mangistau. By piling these stones, nomads were paying their respect for nature and patron spirits of their tribes, Ara. The expedition had covered more than 150 kilometers of an uninhabited desert. Not a single car was seen during those 24 hours. Sandy desert areas alternate with limestone ridges. Suddenly, the Bakhti mountain rises behind the pass. From a distance, the mountain looks like a trapezoidal pyramid. The road leads right to the mountain. It seems quite safe, but the first impression is deceptive. The thin crust covering salt flats, takirs, as locals refer to them, conceals a real salt swamp underneath. Takirs are densely permeated from filamentous blue-green algae, which grow rapidly during the periods of flooding the takirs. During the dry periods, mucus they produce firmly glues the particles of clay, forming a firm crust. Another iconic object on the path of the expedition is a chalky Bozzhira mountain. It is located in the midst of Karashek Depression, on the outskirts of the western escarpment of Ustyurt. Every year, thousands of tourists from different countries visit this place to contemplate this miracle of nature. Bozzhira is translated from Kazakh language as white washout, which is consistent with the view in front of the travelers. Castle-like ramparts rise above the milky white surface of the depression. It seems as if mythical wizard has built these ivory towers. But in reality, this wonderful architectural ensemble was created by the serfs of the ancient Sarmatian Sea. Giant sharks and other marine creatures lived here 300,000 years ago. Their remains can be found in chalk deposits of the escarpments. If the Karashek Depression is associated with the open mouth of a giant prehistoric animal, then two buttes rising from the canyon floor are their fangs. In fact, this is exactly how people refer to them. A long chain of stones lead right to the base of the escarpment. These are the remains of once ground hunting constructions of the past. Around so stone arrows of Ustyurt were made for wild ungulates betue hunting. Hunting was the main source of food for medieval armies. Sometimes several thousand horsemen would take part in hunting. They formed a wide circle, encircling areas of tens of thousands of hectares. Herds of wild donkeys, mouflons, gazelles, saiga antelopes, or wild horses were surrounded in a gradually tightening ring. By the 19th century, some species like tapans and kulans were completely exterminated on the territory of western Kazakhstan. However, numerous rock paintings are evidential that prior to that, those animals inhabited this area. Fauna of Ustyurt Nature Reserve is quite unusual for Kazakhstan. A honey badger, an animal typical for African region, lives here as well. It was only after the establishment of the reserve when this animal was listed in the inventory of Kazakhstan fauna. Before that, no one suspected that such an exotic for our latitude species lived in Ustyurt area. An Asian striped hyena can also be found here. Apparently, it comes from the territory of Turkmenistan. Caracal, a rare desert lynx, is another species that one may stumble across in Ustyurt. Until recently, this area was a home for cheetahs. Last the time a cheetah was spotted here was in the early 80s from a helicopter. From the cliff, members of the expedition see a female jayran with a cub. It is just a few days old, but it manages to keep up with its mother. The lambing of jayran gazelles here is almost 1 month earlier than in Almaty region. This is another surprising feature of Ustyurt. About 100,000 jayran gazelles and up to 10,000 Ustyurt mouflons inhabited these areas in the 60s of the last century. By the end of the 70s, mouflon population dropped to 2,000 and gazelle population to 10,000. In the early 90s, the saiga herds of Ustyurt were practically swept away. The populations of Hubara, Bastard and Caracal were declining drastically. Recent years had shown the slow recovery of populations of these rare animals. Despite the rain, the expedition keeps moving towards Karinjarik Depression. Aula Kuduk is the last town on the way to the heart of the Ustyurt Plateau. Seems like the waters of a great flood spilled on this village. A sandy desert begins behind Aul. Sand absorbs water, therefore it's much easier for vehicles to drive here, comparing to driving on salt marsh. The Akuduk Desert is a part of the Karinjarik Basin, separating the Ustyurt Plateau and Mangishlag. The depression is 75 meters above sea level. It is framed with ledges of a western escarpment, which are up to 300 meters high. They resemble castles of wizards from fairy tales. The southern section of the western escarpment of Ustyurt, rugged with deep gorges, has many caves and hollows, formed by karst processes of times when this area was covered by sea waters. It keeps raining, the sun is going down, and members of expedition have to think about lodging for the night. Suddenly they see a house next to the old tumbled-down cemetery. The inspection of the building reveals that the house was built specifically for travelers. In exchange, they might leave some money in a special bag inside the house and are expected to leave the house clean and tidy. The laws of hospitality are sacred and continue from those ancient times when the caravan routes linking inland China with Iran and the Black Sea were passing through the Ustyurt. Not only merchants and soldiers traveled along this road. It was also used by dervishes, philosophers, poets, scientists and writers. Fascinated by the scenic canyons of Ustyurt, they passed their excitement to their countrymen. Some have written books, embellishing real events with free flow of fantasies. This is why in medieval chronicles, picturesque canyons of Ustyurt are inhabited by all sorts of mythical characters, the Amazons, Cyclops, genies, and Peri. Phantasmagoric landscapes of the Ustyurt are really putting people in a mystical mood. Members of the expedition would probably not be very surprised to witness an evil Zhalmaus camper witch sitting on top of the cliff, luring travelers into the abyss. But the crew of Kazakhstan's Wildlife Sanctuaries program defies any evil spell, since many more adventures are ahead of us.